Alright lads, let's see if we can sort this shit show out. Now, as you'll recall, we got some new information at the end of the last video where it turns out that the northern neighbour that we have, that we've been operating against and trying to build something, some level of defence against, on the expectation that things are fairly balanced. Turns out that's completely wrong. You'll remember, hopefully as clearly as I do, that their military status is overwhelming, meaning that we have to completely redesign our foreign policy strategy towards them. Now, thankfully, we still haven't as yet given them a casus belli. You'll remember that I chose not to remove our diplomatic embassy from their nation, only to declare that they were up to some bad stuff, which is good. I probably would have done that anyway, but we need to recalculate our military strategy. Now, assuming that they have the overwhelming force that they're reported to have, and our country is based around this bay, it instantly becomes obvious that this area here, Benfi, is the safest part, and this area here in Agnaland is the least safe part, right? Although all of this border is up to here. In fact, we could even say that potentially they would just drive across this sector. All the way down to here is at risk. So if we draw a straight line from here, and we're assuming that these, how wide did we say these were? 500 kilometers, was it? Let's have a wee look. No, 100 kilometers. So we're looking at 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. We're looking at a 600 long border, a 600 kilometre long military front opening with Romberg on the day that they invade. And because we're waiting for their invasion rather than us engaging with them, we know that they will engage with wherever they see the advantages. Now, our capital city here, Holsord, is fairly safe. However, our second economic centre here, the Gulf of Nargis, is at serious risk. So, if I was Rumberg and I wanted to knock out Swordland, what would I do? The shortest gaps are between the border and the coast. So, and this seems to be the narrowest gap of all. So probably what I would do is try and drive a wedge to the coast here and then force surrenders from these areas. Now, I would be cautious about going too close to the coast because I don't know what the range of the naval guns that our army has. And this analysis is just, that our navy has, and this analysis is just in terms of one-on-one, right? And then having driven this wedge and forced a surrender from this part, you could either sue for peace, or if it looks like you can roll them, then take a bit more. Now, this is a large open area that is here. So, I would be very tempted to siege this city, Estord, and then hold Larkhaven at risk. Now, the advantage of holding Larkhaven at risk is that it forces Swordland into a defence, right? So we really would need to perform some kind of counter-attack if possible. And if our forces are sieging from this side, if we can gain all of this sector up to the river, so we are engaging across this boundary here, then the counterattack has to come around this way and across this river, and crossing the river will be a massive pain, so we'll just blow every bridge here. And then that will give us some level of military advantage against the counterattack. Now you might say, well, why doesn't Swordland just attack on this open front here? And the answer is, every military asset that is deployed on this side instead of on this fight speeds up the amount of damage that we can do to Lockhaven, and the sooner that Lockhaven will fall. I think that even with overwhelming force, I don't think that Rumburg will be able to capture both of these two cities and move through this zone, because this is our kind of richest and most logistically advanced area between here due to that high-speed railway. So I think that they will have real problems getting past this gap here, right? So this sort of narrow gap here would make a fairly good defensive boundary, except that two of the cities that we care about are on the other side of it. So what we're going to have to do if they invade is engage in a staged orderly retreat, where we just take a step back, right? They perform an offence, we try to impose disproportionate losses on them over the day of that offence that they perform. Then we perform an orderly retreat where the front rank moves back behind the second rank into the third rank, and then we wait for the next attack, and we just do that over and over again and try to impose as many losses as we can in order to try and even the score, so that by the time that it comes to the siege, and if they do choose to siege Lockhaven, that will cause a significant amount of it will tie up a fair amount of their assets, and then theoretically, and now I'm assuming that Rumburg doesn't have any variety of navy, then we will have our military in here in the Gulf of Nargis, and our navy in the Gulf of Nargis trying to pound their positions, right, and to waste their material and manpower. They might choose to stay away from the coast and attack Dyer instead of attacking Lockhaven, right? But in order to stay away from the naval guns, because no one likes to be under naval fire. If that's the case, this is fairly well populated, so this could turn into a total war of national defence. That's a real problem. Given that we are already in a bulge in these sectors here, and they have overwhelming force, I don't see a way for us to successfully defend Narbel if they decide that they want to spend the resources required to take it. Estord, I would love to keep it, but I just don't think that's going to be possible. And as I say, this gap here will just cut off everything. Now, if that's the situation that we're in terms of just a one-on-one dust-up, let's put it in its diplomatic context. Valen is weak, so we can't really expect anything from them. Lesbia is wealthy, and potentially at some kind of level of diplomatic, at some diplomatic level we might be able to make a plea to them for resources, essentially turning us into a proxy for their interests, right? And the reinforcement lines should be pretty straightforward. If Lesbia chose to reinforce us in the same way that the United States reinforced the Russians against the German advance in the Second World War, with trucks and that kind of thing, so that whatever truck factories we have can be converted into armour factories instead, that sort of thing. I feel fairly confident that we would be able to hold these two, Lockhaven and Dyer, against a full push if we mobilise the entire country in a total defensive war. But anything beyond that, anything outside north of this sector here, that could easily be pushed through. Now, remember our conundrum that we have about Agnolia. We could sign a defensive pact against Agnolia, against Rumburg. But to do so would mean that it would bring us in an opposition to Valgsland, because this area here, Helgeland, is disputed territory between these two nations. And we don't, and in fact cannot, fight both Valgsland and Rumburg at the same time. Now, if we were able to diplomatically persuade Valgsland to stay out of the war, and Agnolia and Suzerain were aligned against Rumburg, then that becomes a totally different thing, because all of the forces that Rumburg sends south to attack Larkhaven and Dyer are not operating against Agnolia. Now, Agnolia might not be a particularly powerful country, but I'm sure they can stage some kind of threat. It's a small march to Dome, who I'm certain that they want to reoccupy, so in a revanchist war, to reverse the boundary movement of the last war, they could advance to here. And even just applying pressure would be great. Imagine this scenario. Agnolia forecloses on Dome with minimal losses, because this area hasn't been reinforced because Rumburg is sending things south. Then Agnolia starts to advance overland towards Zarborough. Instantly, Rumburg cannot allow this gap to be closed, because if the Agnolians manage to advance all the way to the Tranquil Sea here, that means any resources that have to come south have to go around the Tranquil Sea, right? So they can't allow that, so that means they have to pull resources back and peel them off to the defence of Zarborough and to maintain this MSR here, right? This main strategic route. So that really is a significant advantage for us. Now, that's a real conundrum, all right? Now, let's take a step even further out and put it in terms of grand strategy. The alliance of the two major free market and communist international alliances, what are they called? CPS and ATO or something like that? Or CNS and ATO? To the degree that we get drawn into one of those, it would be to our advantage. Because at the moment, our military situation is dire enough that we would want to bring ourselves into alignment with ATO if possible. If we achieve that, that does mean that we have chosen a side in a world war, if that occurs, but that's still probably better than being outside of the alliance and just having all of our northern territories picked off by Rumburg without being able to do anything about it. Now, that whole situation sounds pretty dire, but we do have a counter-strategy. Our counter-strategy is this. We try and join ATO, and we hope that that holds off Rumburg long enough so that their allies in the communist alignment dissuade them from attacking, on the risk that that could kick off a international war of ATO versus CSP, or whatever it's called, in which case we try to get our economy online as quickly as possible in order to develop our and then spend the money that we make on the military, including those ICBMs that are being developed by, I think it was a Lesbian country, or was it the one country on the other side of Lesbia? Anyway, one of the ATO countries, the one that I invested in, that military contractor. We try and buy some of those ICBMs and then we get nukes as soon as possible, and chuck them on the ICBMs, which will be expensive, and then we maintain those. And the second that any single one of them steps foot across our border, we just nuke their capital. Now, that's quite tenuous, but what it does do is it means that we have to be even more highly motivated to make as much money as we can off making our economy work as quickly as possible. So let's move forward with that understanding. Now, we already have conscription, don't we? So if they do invade before the time that we have enough military materiel to be able to survive an offensive, we'll just perform a mass conscription and throw men into the front and hope that we can fight them to a standstill and hopefully keep, and then sue for peace and hopefully keep this gap here from the north side of Larkhaven all the way down to Valen. And we'll have to give all of that away, which would be bad, but who knows, we might be able to reverse that at some point. Alright. Okay, let's see what the situation is. Read the report from Holsort. Kazaro Kibina demands emergency to be called. The leader of NFP, that's the Nationalist Front Party, I believe. National Front Party. Kazaro Kibina has demanded an emergency be called to address the increasing political violence in the country. He stated that without a declaration of emergency, Swordland would be destabilised and the integrity of the country would be damaged even further. Yeah, well, that's a bit rich considering you guys bloomin' shot one of those MPs, so shot that MP. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sympathetic to the policy decision, but incredibly hypocritical. All right. I came a little early to the meeting room before anybody showed up. We had scheduled a meeting to discuss the progress of the Reform Committee regarding the new constitution. I took a seat at the centre chair in the vacant meeting room as I waited for them to show up. The reforms were slowly becoming the most significant expectation of my government. We would be changing Sol's constitution of 29. Most people nowadays blame the constitution for the outstanding problems of the country. On the other hand, the reformists in the assembly had been getting louder about their demands. What I knew for sure was that I needed to do something about this encroaching chaos before it swallowed me. Yikes. Meanwhile, let me just turn the brightness up here a little. Meanwhile, Lucien, Peter and Nia had been leading the committee to prepare an initial draft for the constitutional amendments. I was intrigued to hear their results. There was a knock at the door. It was Lucien. "Good afternoon, sir." Lucien arrived exactly on the hour mark again. His punctuality could almost be described as obsessive. "Good afternoon, Lucien." He took a seat at the table and took out a bunch of documents, spreading them on the long table. "We should begin the meeting as soon as Mr. Morgana and Mr. Vice President arrives. We finally have some results from the Reform Committee." "How does it look?" "Well, the situation is quite complicated, but I'm sure we will make it work, just like we accomplished many things before. We'll go over the details regarding the new constitution in the meeting." A few minutes later, Peter and Nia also arrived. After a short chat, everybody sat down and took out notes. I knew it was going to be a long meeting. There is a lot of talk going about the future of this process. Let us begin to tackle the points of contention. "Mr. President, I've heard from Mr. Gallardo that you're not intending to support the democratic reforms. Now, remember, we have said that we need to throw them a bone at the very least. But I certainly want to retain as much power as possible because having a powerful executive allows for quick responses to situations, and if we get invaded, I might need to be able to just bring the hammer down and say, yeah, we're not doing any of this stuff. This is our priority. Orient everything towards that. Our committee meetings have been really fruitful, but we already started on the constitutional draft together with the feedback from all the political parties. We're making clear progress here. You wouldn't really block our hard work, would you?" "A final decision hasn't been made yet." "I would. What's that supposed to mean?" "I've already explained my intentions." "A final decision hasn't been made yet." She leaned slightly towards me. This is our once-in-a-lifetime chance to change the constitution of Tarquin's soul, Mr. President. We worked hard to create a draft together for the leaders of the party and the opposition. Nothing else is more important for Swordland. Yeah, you obviously haven't been paying attention to our foreign policy conundrums. With all due respect, I'll be the judge of that. If I may continue, Mr. President, we've discussed the possibilities of your intentions with Mr. Gallardo. We already know that the old guards would block any reforms to the Constitution, so they would definitely want to work with you to preserve it, if that's still what you want to do. Oh, I can't believe you're supporting this too. I do not. I have already explained, Mr. President, my position on working with the old guards. So you came here to tell me not to do this. I appreciate your thoughts. Come now, I can't have you all go against me on this. How about you, Peter? Let's get some advice from our Deputy PM. I think we can figure something out. You can call a meeting with Orso Hawker. Now, who's that guy? Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Okay, yep. So he's the head of the Old Guard faction. We're not here to destroy the legacy of Tarquin's soul. Why not work with them? I just do not trust the Chief Justice in delivering any promises. I'm afraid that ignoring the demands for reform might create some future problems for our administration. Well, excuse me, gentlemen, the reforms are not just some problem, they are absolutely necessary to democratize this country. With all due respect, I have to say that I feel disappointed. I thought this administration was going to bring real change. It seems solism still lives on. So what do you suggest we do? Work with the reformists on writing a more democratic constitution for Swordland. Change cannot be stopped. Maybe we can first go over the draft of the amendments that the committee prepared for reforms. You do not have to approve it. So you see how I'm very much playing a hedging role here, right? I want to see what's actually on the table and consider what the implications are before making any decision. I've heard the security reports. Now is not the time for reform. Fine, let's hear it. You too. Fine, let's hear it. Of course, we'll go through each of the main demands of the committee and get your input. Mrs. Morgner can explain them further. We'll start with the first red line. The new constitution will fix the loopholes regarding the president's absolute veto powers. Even though Mr. Richter put on a whole show about why vetoes should completely be removed, the committee has almost unanimously agreed on fixing the loopholes, thus limiting presidential vetoes. My suggestion is to add a clause detailing the methods the Assembly may override a veto with some sort of supermajority. One person should never be able to block the rest. Well, let's see. I stand in agreement. See, the thing is, I want all of the presidents who come after me to have their veto removed, but I don't want to have my veto removed. I stand in agreement with Mr. Richter. The vetoes should be removed. The loopholes give the president too much power. They will not be allowed to dictate the negotiations. I think we can hedge on this one. This is one of the starting points of the whole discussion about changing the constitution. I don't think this is up to discussion for any reformists. The second one is about the judiciary. The new constitution will remove the Supreme Court's right to vote on legislation. This is yet another point that was unanimously agreed on by all parties. Tarquin Sol established this rule to protect his 1929 constitution. We all know most of the judges are still his pawns. Constitutional amendments will still be very difficult to accomplish with a reform like this, particularly because we will keep the 2/3 vote system to be able to propose a change. However, the judiciary will not have the final say in the amendments. So this is a classical political science dilemma. A Westminster system has much less obstructions because there's less blocking of what's going on, so it's able to respond more quickly to the external stimuli. But on the other hand, the American system, like the Republican parliamentary system with the Senate and the Congress and the President, is much better at preventing tyranny, but the way that it achieves that is by preventing the governmental system from really being able to do anything. So it spends a lot of its time completely locked up and not able to achieve anything. Now, if we get rid of the veto and the judicial oversight of the legislative, if we get rid of the veto, that is going to remove one of the blocks, and it will shift power towards the assembly. And similarly, if we get rid of the judicial oversight, that will get rid of that will cede power towards the Assembly as well, because the Assembly can just start making laws and the judiciary and the executive can't do anything about it. So I think I'm probably going to fold on one of these and not the other. And if I can do that, that means that we will still be able to block the laws that get made if they're just silly, but it will still throw a bone to the populist assemblymen. Now, which one should we get rid of and which one should we keep? I suggest we get rid of the president's veto and maintain the judicial veto, because that looks really good for me, like I'm giving up my power, but actually anything that but actually the Supreme Court is probably more likely to block laws than I am, because it looks really bad if I block laws, whereas there's 10 of them on the Supreme Court. So if they block a law, and also because it's staffed almost entirely by old guard members, they're probably more likely to block laws than I am. So I think that I can give up my veto if necessary, and then rely on the Supreme Court to do the vetoing. Theoretically, we could do it the other way around, but that would alienate the old guard and make me look like a dictator. Neither of those things which I want to do. And we do have to give something to the libs, unfortunately. Okay, constitutional amendments will still be very difficult to accomplish with a reform like this, particularly because we will keep the 2/3 vote system to be able to propose a change. However, the judiciary will not have the final say in the amendments. We need the court to even pass this change. Why would they support this? Well, that's an interesting question. This is already what we wanted to do? No, I don't want to pass the legislative oversight change. Can't disagree with that. Okay. Most of them won't, but we already talked about my vote and a possible agreement with Isabel, which may change things. Apart from these two critical points, they have other major demands. Oh, jeepers. Alright, they wanted to reform the appointment procedures of the ministers. Mr. Richter clarified that the Assembly should have a say in the formation of the Council of Ministers. That is something that a majority in our party also supports. Well, Mr. Richter also talked about abolishing the member of honour rights of Tarquin Sol that gives him absolute immunity and makes him a permanent member of the Assembly. Oof. Removing immunity? That is a dangerous suggestion. Why he's a member of the Assembly, I don't know. But well, that one is a controversial one. I doubt the USP would like that. Republicanism, nationalism, and statism. Tarquin Sol's party. Right, I understand that. Okay, immunity of the justices, the impeachment of the president, limiting the power of the presidential decrees, all of this came up during the committee meetings. Yes, reformists expect big reforms, while our faction in the USP are not very keen on pushing changes that are too great. I'd say keeping everything in the middle ground is the safest bet. No need to agitate anyone too much. I disagree. We'll push for comprehensive reforms. I agree. Let's keep the changes small and manageable. Yeah, that sounds good to me. They have valid concerns that we need to look at. Alright, let's keep the changes small and manageable. As long as we address the main issues, I also agree. Yes, well, this is going to be bittersweet for you when I finally make up my mind. Regardless of what Mr. Rain decides, we will need to work together to push this agenda. Now we should wrap this up. Since we evaluated the points, I'd like to hear your input, sir. Are these the only two options? No, you can't expect me to... I've got to be able to pick and choose. I can't just pass all of them or pass none of them. This is ridiculous. I will support the new constitution. I won't support these reforms. We'll work with the old guard to block them. What do you reckon, lads? If we do this, we're basically handing over all power to the Assembly. And if we don't support the reforms, then we're essentially maintaining Tarquin Soul-style dictatorship. I would really like to be able to pick and choose from them. Well, we do hold the majority. Like, the reason why we're in power is because we do hold the majority. So, and there still is the 2/3 of the assembly measure. So, for the good of the nation, I will shift us across to democracy on the assumption that, given the incoming invasion from the north, when the invasion comes along, the nation will swing to the right anyway. So it will either be us or the old guards will benefit from that, and we will still have a long-term capacity to make sure that we're in control because we are the best people to to fight the defensive war against Rumburg when it comes. I'll present your input to the committee. In a few months, you would have a draft on your desk to make the final changes yourself. Yeah, maybe I can read pen a few of these in time. And even if I have to, not exactly break my promise, but water down my promises, that's a standard political manoeuvre. I'll still get the credit of having done it. I think this was yet another fruitful meeting, sir. Your service is appreciated. If we do this, we'll be remembered as heroes. Together we will democratise Swordland. Thanks for the meeting, everybody. Just keep it formal for the moment. Thanks for yes, and a bunch of thanks and goodbyes. Alright. Are there any other issues? Let's do a quick spin around the map. Alright. The report from Conriart, promising industrial potential. Yeah, that's what I like to hear. The Mayor of Conriart, Chris Shah, reports that a decision to start the construction of the L1 high-speed railway project caused the industrial investors all over the country to invest money in regions near the city. The Mayor is hopeful that the completion of the project will result in a substantial economic growth in Conriart. Well, me too, Chris Shah, me too. All right. Read the report from Hulsard. L1 construction plans started by Underhaul. Underhaul Construction has reported that preparatory work for the L1 railway has already started, including clearing land and transporting equipment. Construction of the railway will be starting in the next months from Hulsard. Good. Are we ready for a meeting with Chief Justice Orso Horka? There's really not anything else that we need to do. Alright. Meeting after meeting after meeting. Governing is a chore, but it's also a responsibility. The administration had been working day and night on the overwhelming amount of issues that were facing the country. The department sent several documents which required my signature so they could start working on the new decisions that were taken. As I signed dozens of them, I closed my eyes to relax for a moment. Another long day. Even though I really wished to leave the palace for the day, Lucian had earlier told me that the Chief Justice wanted to speak to me. We planned to meet in my office in 30 minutes. I waited for him, wondering what subject he would raise. Take a moment to relax, stretch out my arms and look out the window. Thousands of shimmering lights in the Hulsard skyline were mesmerising. Suddenly I heard a knock on the door. It was Lucian Gallardo. Good evening, sir. Good evening, Lucian. I'm sorry I couldn't explain the situation to you in detail earlier, sir. The Chief Justice insisted on seeing me this evening. I do not know what he has to say, but it will probably be about the new constitution. He will be coming shortly with Judge Mr. Garachi in their meeting. We shouldn't take them lightly. I think he's here to test the waters. They're here to threaten us to stop the reforms. We may be able to cooperate with them. Regardless of what they say, I will continue with the new constitution. They're here to threaten us to stop the reforms. We knew they would react at some point. There were 3 knocks at the door. Lucian checked his watch. He looked rather worried. Livia opened the doors. Chief Justice Orso Horka and Judge Heron Garachi entered the room. Good evening, Mr. President. It's great to see you. Evening. Welcome. Good to see you indeed. Orso gestured at the sofa in the office. May I? Please. We all took our seats on 2 opposite sofas and made ourselves comfortable. So these guys here are obviously to say, look, you can't go through with these reforms, so I'm going to try and pacify them and backpedal as much as I can without looking like an absolute worm. How were your first couple of months, Mr. President? I hope you're faring well. Thank you, I'm very busy, but I'm doing good. To be honest, it was a rough start. I'm doing extremely good. No need to worry, Mr. Garachi. No need for pleasantries. Let's get to the point. Thank you, it's very busy, but I'm doing good. That'll do. It will only get busier, yet I think you're doing a good job so far, considering all that's happening around us with the shootings near the palace and soldiers on our borders. Yeah, well, thank you, Garachi. Butter me up. He let out a deep sigh. Oh yeah, here it comes. Everything before the butt is bullshit. It is a troubling time. We appreciate your concerns, so you probably know why we're here. You're here to bribe me. You're here to stop the new constitution. We are only here to tell you that the Supreme Court does not approve of the attempt to change the constitution. And with all due respect, the Constitution needs to be updated, sir. I am sure you are well aware of the public demand and our circumstances. Oh, is that so? I see you are the one who is not aware of our actual circumstances. You want to make a weaker constitution in the midst of problems from both inside and outside. Even if your proposal passes the Assembly, I will make sure it will not pass the Supreme Court. That much is clear. Awesome. That means that I can go full ahead on this, try to pass it, it will go through the Assembly, I'll rubber stamp it, it'll go to the Supreme Court, they'll overturn it, and then I get to keep all of my powers while looking like the good guy. It just keeps getting better and better. Oh, you haven't even seen the proposal yet, Mr. Hawker. Isn't it too soon to be against it? So you came here to threaten us? Come on, Mr. Hawker, we can figure something out. We'll get the court too, even if you do not cooperate. Here we go. We can, if you decide to give us a listen. Mr. President, you seem to be only partially informed about the current situation. Let us explain the reasons of our stance. Hopefully there hasn't been too big of an oversight here. I believe I'm fully explained. Oh, please explain. Let's hear it. I don't care about your reason. Oh, please explain. Yeah, that's the polite one. We are protecting the Constitution because it works, Mr. President. It is efficient and gives you the authority to lead the nation with swift decisions. Yes, that's my feeling exactly. Swordland has more important problems and threats that we should face right now. Instead of nitpicking about some paragraphs of the Constitution, we have a potential war within our borders. Couldn't agree more. Also signalled Heron with his hand to let him speak instead. Mr. President, I know that you are a busy man, so I will make this quick. We all know that Swedish security forces found stashes of Rumburgian weaponry in the hideouts of Bludish separatists. AK-47s are roaming inside Swordland at this moment. Look, I'm well aware of it, as you say. As such, Mr. Rumburg poses a... as such... Let me run that one back and try again. As much as Rumburg poses a direct threat, now it's clear that they are also intervening in our country and weaponising our minorities against us. It's not unprecedented to think that the Bloods will start their terror again with their new toys. Not to mention the fights that broke out between the left and right wing after the shooting of Bernard Kirkas. Communists are rising with the support of United Kontana. The chaos is imminent for Swordland, and sadly we don't see the administration taking the necessary precautions yet. We clearly need more funding for our security forces for the days to come. So, what are they trying to sell me? More funding for the security forces. Mr. Hawker, the court has no jurisdiction over these matters. We are taking the necessary steps, no need to worry. I will actually be increasing the security budget shortly. That's the one. I am relieved to hear that. But regardless of that, are you also aware that the armed Bludish separatists have direct connections with the Workers' Party of Bludia? Everybody knows that. They claim otherwise. Workers' Party is a democratic party, unlike the militias. They're not the same. I mean, they are all Bloods. Jeepers, dude. Everyone knows that. You know what that means. Do you remember the vote of the Workers' Party in the last election? What is this all about? The only reason they are not in the Assembly is because of the electoral threshold. They have gotten quite big. They are clearly getting outside help, and their connections to the paramilitary Bludish force cannot be denied. And all of a sudden, the reformists are trying to decrease their electoral threshold so that the Bludish separatists can be legitimised in the Assembly to achieve their aims of independence. I mean, at this point, depending on how things go with the border, I would consider letting the Bludish separatists make a buffer state between us and Rumburg. Because, I mean, that's how dire the situation is with Rumburg to the north, right? Better that we let go some of them peacefully and look like the good guys than have it taken off taken off us and look like the weak guys, let alone all of the cost in human lives. You think that's Mr. Richter's intention? I will not allow it to happen. That's too dramatic. I'm just going to play the innocent with this one. Do you think that's Mr. Richter's intention? I suspect his intentions are grander, but I wish the only issues were the Bludish terrorists in Rumburg. Reformists suggest changes would also bring the communists who are backed by United Kontana into the assembly. Do you see the pattern yet? I apologise, gentlemen, but I am not a conspiracy theorist. You're saying the reformists are working for the foreign powers? I mean, they clearly are. And there's no evidence about any of this. No, I believe it. There doesn't need to be. And what is your suggestion? That's the one for us. We should take the necessary measures against communist and Bludish plots, as well as increasing our military budget against a possible conflict with Rumburg. Yes, that is definitely true. And of course not fall into the traps of the reformists by listening to their demands. They are clearly plotting to weaken the president and our whole administration in order to exploit the situation. Which brings us to some very important information that we have. It's definitely something you need to hear, and it can change absolutely everything. Oh, with all due respect, Mr. President, I think this is getting slightly ridiculous. Let the Chief Justice talk. Luchin, please explain, Mr. Hawker. Here we go. The person in question is Mr. Franz Richter himself, the leader of the reformists. Okay. Freedom and Justice Party. Also a major shareholder of the construction company Taurus Holding. Interesting. We almost considered going with them for that infrastructure project, which would have enriched one of our political opponents. Pure luck on that one. We have enough information to infer that he has ties with Arcasia. Arcasia is aggressively growing their influence around the world, and now we have Mr. Richter coming up with these ridiculous demands for a new constitution amidst a chaotic period in Swordland. All the pieces seem to fit perfectly. That is why the Supreme Court were doing what it takes to stop these reforms and preserve the constitution. How would you know that Mr. Richter has ties to Arcasia? Mr. Gallardo, we all know that he has been in Arcasia many times because it's been documented, but what would you think if he has been making hidden flights to the country? I need to know this, please explain. He's been spotted in a hotel in Arcasia last year where they held the conference on economic development in volatile regions. Right around that time, he started to influence the masses into believing that our constitution is the reason for everything bad. His trip was not documented, nor was he an official guest of the conference. We believe that he had a meeting with President Walker behind closed doors. I also have a couple more photos of him that were taken in Arcasia in different cities. One is from a couple of months back. Again, none of it is documented. He also attended another event in Lesbia last week. The Arcasian Minister of Foreign Affairs was there too. Well, we want to bring Lesbia on side. How did you find out about this? How can any of this be undocumented? If this is true, this is big. I told you so, Mr. President. Many solists were already following his leads for quite some time, Mr. President. I cannot give away their identities, but I can give you the evidence. Now, let's see what this has in the file, independent of anything else, if this is true, we can throw it up as a political scandal to damage their party and hopefully knock them back to a similar level of popularity as the right-wing party. It contains official documents from the Swedish Borderang with highlighted dates that showed no trace of Franz Richter's names. There were clear photos of him that were taken in the conference in Arcasia, as well as remarks by Lesbian and Arcasian citizens who claimed to have seen him with Arcasian businessmen around the same dates. There was also an official transcript of one of his speeches, where he claimed to be in Benfey on the dates of the conference in Arcasia, where he was spotted. Lucian skimmed through the documents with scepticism, which slowly turned into surprise. These seem to be real. Of course they are, Mr. Gallardo. These seem to suggest that Arcasia is behind the reformists. Their demands will only benefit Arcasia. Constitution, western half of America, considered as a superpower of the world. Now, are they the communist superpower or the free market superpower? Strongest economy in the world, civil rights records, good political freedoms, low unemployment, high purchasing power, founding member of ATO. Well, that's fine. We absolutely want to be on side with Arcasia. This is clearly a plot against Swordland. I bet Rumburg is part of their plan too. This cannot be a coincidence that they are weaponizing our minorities against us around the same time. Now you understand the reasons for our current stance, and also our suspicion about your advisors, who clearly have not given you this vital information. I wonder if this is a psyop. Lucien gave him a sharp look. We appreciate the information, Mr. Hawker, but I advise against jumping to conclusions right away. We will need to check the information. Well, there is not much to think or check. This is clearly an emergency. In such cases, the Constitution gives the President the right to use his emergency powers. If we work together, you can be sure that the Supreme Court will not block your declaration of emergency. Skeptical. You want me to declare an emergency? Let's talk about how we can work together. You want me to declare an emergency? Of course, we cannot wait for the process of the Assembly to take care of these issues. You must exercise your presidential powers for a fast and effective solution, which means you might need to suspend parts of the Constitution to give more authority to our security forces to deal with these issues. We must officially investigate Mr. Richter as well. Yeah, don't know about this one. You can devise a strong security decree if you base it on the Articles 57 and 58, which gives the President the right to suspend parts of the Constitution to deal with national security threats. You can directly bypass the Assembly in such a situation. The only thing you need is the Supreme Court to allow the emergency to be declared, and you have our word on that. Sir, I think this is going a bit too far. We shouldn't escalate things so fast. Mr. President, why don't we talk in private? Only two of us. We can devise a plan together. I know how we can use the Constitution to our advantage. It would be more effective if Mr. Gallardo and Mr. Garachi leave the room before we discuss it. Sir, I advise against it. I think it's extremely unlikely I'm going to go with what's going on here, but anyway. Could you leave us alone with Mr. Hawker, gentlemen? I like your idea, Mr. Hawker, but I'd rather plan it together. I'm sorry to say that we won't be cooperating, Mr. Hawker. Regardless of our situation, I'll be proceeding with the reforms. Well, we might as well hear him out. Right, so they leave. Mr. President, if you stop the Reform Committee meetings immediately and focus on the real threats, I will guarantee you we will manage the reformists together. You must eliminate these threats, both internal and external. An emergency act can help you do that. We cannot trust anyone in the administration, neither. I agree Swordland is in a crisis. Tell me more about the legal details of the Emergency Act. How can we fight against these threats with an Emergency Act? Well, there is a crisis going on, that's true. Yes, this is very serious. According to Article 58, if public security and order are seriously disturbed or endangered within the Republic of Swordland, the President of Swordland may modify or suspend parts of the Constitution, subject to confirmation by the Supreme Court to determine the validity of the declaration of the state of emergency. Can't the Assembly simply revoke it? How can we effectively silence the opposition? Which parts of the Constitution can we modify or suspend? According to the Constitution, only the President and the Grand National Assembly can revoke the emergency after it is declared. That is correct. However, as long as your party is in line, they will never have a majority to revoke it immediately, so no, they cannot simply revoke it. And which parts of the Constitution can we modify or suspend? The Constitution states that no state shall, in the case of a national emergency, modify or suspend the rights of freedom defined in Article 100 of the Constitution unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. Well, that's good to know that that's there, so we can do that. If we want to give the police more authority, we might need to modify the rights of freedom too, but we were not under an invasion. Such imminent danger, that can definitely be argued to be the case. Yep, so this one looks like the back pedal here, but we're not under invasion. That is correct. However, the section where it states that actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay can be up to interpretation. We're definitely under such imminent danger because of Rumburg. Not to mention United Contana's support for a communist group in Swordland, as well as Friends Richter's involvement with Arcasia, which is definitely connected with all of these problems. And of course that is up to the Supreme Court to decide, so that is not a problem. Oh, I wouldn't actually ask that question. We may need increased surveillance on our political rivals to find out about the connections and plots. Bringing unlimited detention would allow you to arrest people as necessary, such as Mr. Richter. He needs to be eliminated. That might be going a bit too far. What if the investigations cannot find anything incriminating? Yeah, that might be going a bit too far. Yeah, more backpedaling. I disagree. You already know about the coup plots and foreign-backed terrorists in Swordland, and a lot of these issues overlap with the reformist agenda of creating a weaker constitution. Well, all of this might be true, but the problem is the scale, right? What is the scale of the coup plots? Is it just a few coked-up Marxists who think that they can get away with it, or is there an actual insurgency? And the foreign-backed terrorists in Swordland? Yes, we definitely found weapons, but again, is that just a few guys crossing the border in order to create trouble, or is it actually a fully backed, ununiformed invasion force? I suspect Friends Richter is involved with many of these organisations. He may even be working together with Rumberg, and they really do pose an existential threat to Swordland. Okay, but where to begin? Let's talk about the details of the Emergency Act. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Hawker, but I won't be going ahead with this. I thought you wanted to plan our move. I just wanted to hear your plan, and now I've heard it. I cannot do this. I thought I wanted to. Instead, I will be I cannot do this, Mr. Hawker. You will instead push on with your reforms then, and it seems you are also part of the conspiracy after all. Tut tut. There is no conspiracy but yours, Mr. Hawker. I think we should end the meeting before we offend each other. I need to push the reforms, Mr. Hawker, and I will. There is no conspiracy but yours, Mr. Hawker. Good God, I hope Swordland's future is not bleak. Good luck with your reforms, Mr. President. You made a big mistake. He quickly got off the couch and moved towards the door. Goodbye, Mr. Hawker. Don't walk on me, Mr. Hawker. Goodbye, Mr. Hawker. Well, that's really bad. We have managed to alienate one of the people that I was hoping to turn into our political ally, but there was no way that I was going to suspend the Constitution for the purpose of arresting my political allies. My political opponents. Alright, and what's in the newspaper? Lockhaven Times. Also, Hawker has been spotted entering the Maroon Palace. Our sources are intrigued by the timing of this visit that is happening right after the increased conversations around the so-called democratic reform. Historically, Mr. Hawker usually does not frequent the palace unless for official business, and this was certainly an unplanned visit. Clearly there must be something he wants out of this. Our speculation is that this has something to do with the reforms. More to come on this later. Oh, look at that. For the first time, we have a click to proceed button. So does that mean that this counts as the second turn in our playthrough? Let's click it, and then leave the rest for... Oh, hello. Trials of Democracy. I wonder what this is going to be. Right, okay. Just takes us to the next day. Alright. We can do this one in the next video. See you next time, lads.